All right, good day to everybody. Welcome to another faith-seeking understanding university conversation. I am Allan and I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture at Faith-Seeking Understanding University. We're all seekers are welcome to ponder profound things free of charge. And this is another episode of Calmly Considered. And I am joined by, as always, by Michael Cruz, who is the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology, also at FSUU. Our completely invented, unaccredited, with no sports teams university.
Sadly.
But where we just get to talk and think and reflect. That's just, just the way it ought to be. So, Michael, how are you today?
I am doing well, enjoying the nice summer months here in Kansas City. How about you?
Yes, I am too. It's been really, really hot here, hot and humid, and we're going to get a break of a few days in the 70s. So we'll see how that works. I don't mind the hot, humid weather. I just, I just think about February in Ohio, and that cures me of complaining really fast.
Yes, there you go. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, a little sports here. So my Cleveland Guardians, we are in first place ahead of the Twins by one game in the AL Central, which I was thinking this morning, the AL Central ought to have as its motto, we are the AL Central Division. We make mediocrity look average. In other divisions, the Guardians would be so far in the cellar right now. Yeah, but boy, your Royals aren't really doing well, are they?
20 games under 500. However, I will say, since the All-Star break and slightly before, I think they may be. I don't know if they're over 500, but they're right about.
Oh, okay.
They have righted the ship to some degree. They're in a homestand right now, and they're 4-2 on that homestand.
Okay.
So it's and they have all these new rookies. What was we went to a game, I took my nephew to a game Friday night, and of the 9 players on the field, all 9 of them had come up through the Kansas City Royals farm system. And all of them have played their entire professional careers on Royals teams, except for Zach Greinke, who was pitching, who had gone elsewhere and now has come back. So, and these rookies are really exciting. So
yeah. Well,
excited.
Yeah, and the Guardians are a young team. And, I remember in the 90s, this is what John Hart did when he was general manager of the former Indians, is that because, Cleveland, and I'm guessing Kansas City as well, doesn't have the bankroll that New York has.
Exactly.
And so what he did was he said, let's bring up these young rookies, this talent, and let's develop this talent. And let's make the team good and win a championship before they get so good that we got to pay them too much money.
That's what the Royals did in 2014.
Yeah. And so, I mean, when you're in a smaller market like the Royals and the Guardians, if you're going to win, you got to do that, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. Well, the good news for you, Michael, is football season's coming. So you're Yeah. And of course, my former team, the Cleveland Browns, it's a real what show over there.
Boy, is it ever.
And
what a mess.
Just when I think it can't get any more surreal, it does. And so I was also thinking about that this morning and thinking about I don't know what the old Peanuts comic strip. At one point, I think it's Lucy who says to Charlie Brown, of all the Charlie Browns in the world, you're the Charlie Browniest. Well, of all the Cleveland Browns in the world, they are the Cleveland Browniest. It's just amazing what's going on. So anyway, so I'll probably be homeless for the football season, but I'll watch the games and enjoy it. I can always cheer against the Ravens and the Steelers, so that doesn't change.
That's true.
Yeah. So
there's always somebody to be opposed to.
So who are you cheering for on Sunday morning? Who's ever playing Baltimore and Pittsburgh? So that'll work.
Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah.
When they're playing together, that's really bad. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Now what do you do then? All right. Well, so let's have a conversation today. Our subject is Christian nationalism, Christ and Caesar. Really. So let's talk Christian nationalism. It's certainly been front and center lately. I think it has. It's always been around, but it's front and center, particularly I think in this era of Trumpism, as it's called. And so let's first try and get through the weeds of what exactly is Christian nationalism. How would you think of Christian nationalism?
That's a good question. I mean, and the name, I think, is a relatively recent development. I think more broadly of nationalism, well, contrasting patriotism versus nationalism. I think patriotism is just simply love of your country. There's nothing particularly sordid about being patriotic.
Right.
We are people of communities. We don't just exist in isolation, and we don't exist simply as the community of all people on earth. We have sub-communities that revolve family, neighborhood, those types of things. There's nothing wrong with having affinity for that. I think nationalism takes patriotism to another level, which sees nationalism as us against the rest of the communities, that we are distinct and we must maintain our distinctiveness over and against everyone else. And then Christian nationalism, to me, sees Christianity as thoroughly inextricable from national identity, that being a Christian of a particular variety is what it means to be a true member of that nation. So that's how when I think of Christian nationalism, that's what I think of.
Yeah, I like that. So yeah, let's say at the outset here, just sort of jump on what you just said. We're going to critique this clearly. Doesn't mean that you and I hate America.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
I'm glad to be an American. I like being an American. I think our country has done some really good things. I think when it's interesting when any kind of global disaster happens, whether it's an earthquake in Haiti or something else, that Americans really open up their pocketbooks, don't they, for that?
Yes, they do. Sure.
We're very generous in reference to that. And there's other things, but of course, part of love of anything means you're also willing to critique it and that you're willing to criticize it. And so, when people say, and this comes from some of the nationalists, America, love it or leave it, my response to that is that's not a very democratic perspective.
No.
And by the way, it also says America, the America that I want, the America that I think should exist, that's what you should love. And if you don't like it, you should go somewhere else.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
So I do want to make some distinctions because, again, as we were talking about before we went on recording here, when something gets in the news and gets thrown all around, whether it's cancel culture or wokeness, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say, what I think I said the last time you and I talked, is if you want to know what something means, don't ask a politician. Because their job is not to clarify. Their job is to scare the bejesus out of us so that we'll vote for them. So don't ask a politician what cancel culture is or wokeness or even nationalism necessarily. But what happens is that once that gets pulled out, then all of a sudden some people see everything as Christian nationalism, and we want to be careful about this. To be a Christian and to love your country is not Christian nationalism, right? And there are Christians who are members of the military who would not fall into the nationalist category, and there's an awful lot of Christians, in America who, in general, probably buy the very overarching theme that America is a Christian nation and they believe God's blessed America, et cetera, and they wear flags on their shirts. But that doesn't make them nationalists either, does it? Right?
No, right.
It doesn't.
Right.
So we want to be careful about this. One of the things you mentioned that I think we need to talk a little bit about, though, is that Christian nationalism conflates the existence of America and the purpose of America with Christianity.
Yes, right.
And here's what I'm going to say, that it actually makes America a rival ecclesia. That is, it makes America a rival church, that basically Christian nationalism doesn't need the church because it's got America. And then what the church's job then, as Ben Franklin wrote and said on several occasions, he thought the purpose of the church was to make good citizens.
Right.
And in fact, he he writes in his journal. He comes back to Philadelphia, and he goes to a Presbyterian church. You like the story of being Presbyterian, Mike?
Yeah, of course.
He goes to a Presbyterian church for 3 or 4 Sundays, and he writes in his journal that he really liked the pastor, the preacher, but he felt he was saddened that it seemed that the preacher's intent he was more intent on making good Presbyterians than good Americans.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so the purpose then of a church in a Christian nationalist perspective really defaults to lessons in civics, right? Lessons in good citizenship. Whereas, of course, when you read the New Testament, that is not the purpose of the church at all, right?
Right. The church is basically serves as a critique, a loving critique of every culture in which it exists.
Right.
That's its mission.
Right.
Is to give that witness of the kingdom that is to come, that stands as a witness against what currently exists.
Yeah.
And I think that, so yes, any nationalism that sees its nation as the instrument of God and its constitution as a divinely willed document that if we all follow, the whole world becomes under God's rule. I mean, that you've gotten into idolatry.
Yeah.
Because that is not what Scripture calls us to do.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I have a colleague in ministry who I cannot name, but this colleague is now has come into a new appointment in the Methodist Church and is dealing with a Bible study, an ongoing Bible study on the Bible and the Constitution.
Okay.
And it's very clearly meant to conflate constitutional ideas with biblical ideas, and somehow how they, and so maybe we should first talk about, America as a Christian nation. Now, I struggle with that for various reasons. And in fact, in one of my lectures when I teach Christian ethics, I spend a lot of time on that. It is my contention that America is not a Christian nation because to be Christian, you have to really have, and again, this is Bevere's understanding of Christianity, but you would really have had to, you have to have ensconced in your Constitution Trinitarian doctrine. You've got to have ensconced in your Constitution atoning death and resurrection. All right. In other words, you got to somehow put into your secular scriptures the creed, the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. Right. And so it isn't a Christian nation when I think of Christian. However, having said that, certainly many of the founders embraced a Christian perspective in one form or another. Right. And so I want to say that America is not a Christian nation, but it is a nation that was born in the context of Christendom. That is where the populace was basically Christian in one form or another. And you and I both know that Thomas Jefferson's Christianity and John Adams' Christianity would never make it in most of our churches today, right?
Right, sure.
Both of them hated the doctrine of the Trinity. Jefferson called the doctrine of the Trinity a doctrine promoted by snake oil salesmen. Right. So they don't fit that bill, but that doesn't mean they didn't have this Christian context and embraced some underpinnings of this. And so that's why I say it is not a Christian nation, but it is a nation like a lot of nations in Europe reflects the context of Christendom. Now, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. That's one of the streams that flows into our national history, into the documents that we created. There are certain assumptions that are made about humanity and how humanity operates. Part of the founders was the idea was that people can't be trusted. So that's the reason you had to have separation of powers. Yeah. You had to have all these checks and balances. And in some ways, that's a very sort of Calvinist, view of things that people are oriented towards sin, towards corruption. So there are elements that are there, but I think it's pretty clear also that there was not an attempt to establish America as a nation that was to enforce Christianity and to create Christianity.
Yeah. It's interesting that in the during the Adams administration, when we were having trouble, our Navy was having trouble with the Barbary Coast pirates, the North Africa, and a lot of these ships were being seized and the sailors taken into slavery. And part of the critique of these northern Islamic nations was that America was a Christian nation. And so the Congress and John Adams signed off on it, issued a public decree that America in no sense is founded upon the Christian religion. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So when I tell people that, their mouths drop open. Like, really? Yeah, no, he did. They said this is not in any sense founded upon the Christian religion. Now, again, that doesn't mean there isn't that Christian influence, et cetera, in those kinds of things. Now, the problem, it seems to me, is it's one thing to say what you and I just said, and to recognize that there's a Christian Christendom atmosphere. Let's say that, it's kind of what's blowing in the wind, that is what's there. But that also, by the way, doesn't mean that somehow, and you just said this about the establishment of religion, that Christianity or Christians get somehow favored status in the country.
Correct.
The founders never thought about that.
Right. Yeah. That probably wasn't on their framework. Most people, if they had a religion, it was probably Christian related. Yeah. And so I don't think there was a lot of thinking of what.
There wasn't a lot of thinking of it. Of course, you had Jews here, and you had Jews here, and
even a few Muslims. Yeah,
and a few Muslims, and of course Jefferson, who was most explicit on this, talks about that it makes no difference whether his neighbor is Muslim as he misspelled it, or Hindu. I mean, he actually mentions a few religions. Says this makes no difference. This is not not important, and so I don't think that they had this idea that somehow Christianity should be given favored status. By the way, to do that would be to establish a church. Even if you don't, even if you don't encode it in your written law, if there is an assumption that Christians get favored status, that you've already established a religion in some way.
Right. Yeah. But you were mentioning Ben Franklin earlier, and I watched interesting documentary about Benjamin Franklin. I think it was a PBS documentary that was very good, and it reminded me once again that Franklin was one of the few early founders who had visited all of the colonies. He had been to all of the colonies and saw what was going on and saw how different they were.
Yeah.
And yet he felt that they needed to be a unified group if they were to survive going forward in the future. And so therefore, his whole thing was about not trying to establish a religion, because the religions were very different. How they came at Christianity was different across all these colonies. And of course, he himself was not a Christian in the sense that you and I modernly talk about Christian, as you're just giving examples of. And many of these others were not. So some of them may not, there may not have been other religions that were present, but several of these people certainly were not Christian in the modern sense of it, and they did not want a Christian religion opposed, which would compel them to be to live under those dictates as well.
Right.
So,
there's this moment. There's this moment that's recorded in the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where they're fighting. They're hammering out a constitution that's acceptable to all the states, and they're fighting over. I don't remember what it is they're fighting over, but they're fighting over something. And it gets really contentious. And Franklin, who, as you say, was not a religious guy, who I guess for the sake of unity suggests that that everybody pause for a moment, that they all pause for a moment and have prayer.
Yeah.
And so as the account goes, they argued for 20 minutes whether they should pray or not. And then at the end, someone made the motion that they prayed, and they voted it down.
That almost sounds Presbyterian somehow.
Yeah, it does. Well, it does. Franklin did attend a Presbyterian church periodical in Philadelphia. Maybe something rubbed off on him.
Exactly right. Yeah, there you go.
It's hard, but so what is happening that so Christian nationalism has been around. It's always been around.
Right.
But I want to say that in the last 6 to 8 years, Christian nationalists, some of them have not been afraid to come out, in a sense, come out into because they feel like they have a moment. Well, first of all, before we do that, what are some of the reasons you think Christian nationalism has become front and center for some people today? What's going on in our context? This has reared its head, so to speak, and become public.
Right. Well, I think Christian nationalism is looking backward and sees a idealized form of America. I mean, I've used this expression before. Conservatives want to keep things just the way they never were, but there's this sense of the past existing in a certain way, which was largely white, Protestant, and Christian in the past, and that was what made America great.
Mm-hmm.
There is always a sense of declinism. You'll find that all through American history, there's always some segment of the population that sees everything in decline, and so there are people that see America in decline. And part of the reason they see America in decline is because America is becoming less white. 50% of children born today, more than 50% of children born today, are not white. In another 20 years or so, the majority of America will not be white. The Christianity is, in terms of, if you measure in terms of church attendance and people involved with the religious institutions, is in decline. So that is declining. And certainly white Protestantism is declining. And so there is a sense of, I think, of loss, of change happening. I think you can also see on the most radical aspects of it on the left side of the political equation is this idea that America is fatally flawed, and the idea of liberal democracy, small L liberal democracy, is not tenable. And so they are unwilling to support democracy as well. And those voices have become more vocal in recent years, which adds to the, wood to the fire of this idea that America is the line, and there are people that have held traditional values that are the traditionally white Protestant Americans, that they're going to lose power, and that power is going to be exercised against them. And so I think part of what it begins to develop is this feeling that the system is all corrupt, that we can't trust the power systems that are there. And it's clear that they're coming for us, that they're out to get us. And so democracy is no longer viable. So we need to get the power so we can be the ones in power to exercise the vision that we want to have over those who want to have power to exercise it over us. So democracy ceases to be a central element, and the issue becomes about saving Christian America.
White Christian America.
White Christian America, yes. The white Christian America that existed in the past. Yeah. So Christian nationalism. Yeah. And I think that's, when I think of Christian nationalism, there are a lot of people, there are, I guess maybe the best way is a continuum of people. I think we talked about this before. There are people who I would consider patriotic and possibly even overly patriotic, but aren't necessarily Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
And,
fair enough.
But there are people, and you see this rising in elements of the Republican Party and the Trump support. There are these people that have basically given up on the idea that there can be any meaningful sense of democracy, that it's a matter of getting power and exercising power to preserve what they think is America. Yeah.
In other words, we want democracy only when it works for us.
Exactly.
Only when we get what we want. When we no longer are getting what we want, then democracy is itself corrupt.
Right.
And by the way, I think, it's my perspective, when you see these Republican legislatures in certain states with these voting laws, with these voting, under the ruse, and it is a ruse, that we have to protect the vote because we know voting integrity is pretty good. That voter fraud is very limited, very, very limited.
Yeah.
But what they're doing, what they really are doing, what they don't want to say, is that they're trying to make it harder. Because all the restrictions, as you know, and this has been pointed out, is that this hurts minority votes.
Right.
And so that's what they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Making sure that the right people, the real Americans, are
making sure the real Americans vote. As Tucker Carlson likes to call them, the legacy Americans.
The legacy American.
Which is just such a, well, first of all, that's just racist. I'm sorry. But secondly, it just ignores that there was a legacy forged in America long before the first Europeans got here. But but you know, what's a little ignoring our indigenous sisters and brothers, you know, what's about that? Yeah, so by the way, when people say to me, and it's been said to me, and you've heard it said, I'm sure, when someone says, and they're white, and they say, I miss the America I grew up in, this is exactly what they're saying. Now, they may not know that for certain. They may not be able to name it for certain, but in reality, that's what they miss. They miss the America where white Europeans basically were in charge and calling the shots, and minorities were here and they were free, but they were just kind of happy not they were happy even though they didn't really have much of a voice or much of a say.
Right.
What's happening now is not only are they having a say, they're gaining in numbers so that what they say matters. 10 years ago, I would have told you, Michael, I never expected in my lifetime for the Cleveland Indians not only to get rid of Chief Wahoo, but to change their name.
Right.
I would never have said that would have happened.
Right.
I would have never said that the Redskins would get rid of their name. Right. I would, and the only reason that has happened, it's not some incipient Marxist wokeism. Right. It's because these organizations recognize that the tide of public opinion is turning. Right. And that there are the people who have been traditional minorities are increasing in population, and they're now starting to wield a little bit of power, and they don't want to be stereotyped anymore. Right,
exactly. And what you see is a rearguard reactionary response to the fact that the culture has changed, is changing, and has changed.
Right.
And in many of these aspects, it's not going back. Yeah. But the sense of angst and fear over the change, I think, is what drives some of these extreme visions. And that's what people, demagogues like Donald Trump, are so attuned to, is those emotional feelings that people have. And he, for whatever weaknesses he may have in intellect in other areas, he's very adept at tuning into people's emotional sense and being able to tap that.
Absolutely right. He's absolutely good at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had said something, you had posted a link on social media, I think it was yesterday, that I also posted, and it was either something you quoted or it might have been what you said. I don't remember. But conservative and liberal extremes are both authoritarian.
Correct.
But of course, right now, it's the conservative extremes that are front and center. So I do have conservative friends who want to point to the liberal authoritarians on the extreme right, and to which I always respond, that's true, but they're really not running the show right now.
No, they aren't.
Right? If they were running the show, Joe Biden would not have been nominated. You know, and I know that every Republican wants to paint every presidential Democratic candidate as a liberal and extreme, but Joe Biden is not. Right. Right. If the extremists on the left would have had their way, Elizabeth Warren would have been a nominee, for example. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is to recognize here that yes, that the extremes on both ends have authoritarian proclivities, but right now the real danger, the real threat comes from the authoritarians on the right. Fair?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally true. Yeah. And I think probably the reason for that is that if you look the way things are trending, if you're on the left, you can at least have the solace that it feels like while things are not where you want them to be, they seem to be more or less trending your direction in terms of the cultural institutions. Even if the Supreme Court has gone a different direction, and you may not like the past president, the overall stream seems to be going your direction. If you're on the conservative right, everything feels like it's going away from you. And I think that's the reason the authoritarian impulse has become stronger on that end, is that this is, like I said, it's a rearguard reactionary attempt to try to preserve what's been lost.
I say to my conservative friends who want to make a moral equivalence here, I always say, well, when AOC amasses her followers to storm the Capitol, get back to me. Right. I mean, plain and simple. So hey, by the way, I do want to make a quick point. You said conservatives keep things the same that never were.
Yeah.
You want to keep things the same. Does that mean liberals want to make things different that never will be?
The one I actually heard that I heard years ago was conservatives want to keep things just the way they never were. Liberals are people with both feet firmly planted in the air. That was the.
Well, now that we've offended everybody, Michael,
That's
this
right.
is good, because here at
And-
Faith Seeking Understanding, when it comes to politics, we are an equal opportunity annoyer. So
That's right. But well, and if I could quote a great musical lyric, which is off one I've said many times over the years, someone who considers myself not aligned with either of the extremes, is jokers to the left, see clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am stuck in the middle with you. I mean,
yes, that's right. That's right. Here we are. All right. Okay, so let's sort of shift a little bit to talk about the New Testament and
yes.
how this works, as far as, because one of the things that I am convinced of, and I think a lot of people who study this is convinced of, is that Christian nationalism, in its I'm going to call its mainstream form, is clearly not biblical, not remotely biblical. If Jesus were here today, he would not have been at the Capitol to storm it. If Jesus were here today, he would in fact be needling the authorities in Washington on both sides to within an inch of their patience. You know, we all like to think that if Jesus were to come today, we'd all welcome him. And yet I tend to think that we would probably have the same reaction as the religious folks did in Jesus' day.
Right.
And I don't think any of us would be happy with him. And I certainly don't think Jesus's vision of what he was about and his kingdom certainly did not involve a nation. It did not a nation state. It didn't involve, in fact, in many ways, it didn't even involve Israel, right?
Right.
I mean,
right. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't, and it certainly doesn't involve the empire. And so this idea that somehow Jesus, well, so every 4 years, here, one of the things you hear is someone will say, and I know they do it to try to get above all the rancor of politics, but they'll say Jesus for president. And I always say, even that misses the point.
Yeah.
Right? Even that misses the point, because you want Jesus to. So, all right, I'm gonna say one other thing, and then I'll let you respond. One of the passages of scripture that just doesn't get talked about and needs to get talked about is the temptation stories.
Yes.
In Matthew and Luke.
Yep.
At one point, the devil takes Jesus up and he shows him all the kingdoms of the world, and he says to Jesus, "These have been given to me.
Right.
And if you worship me, I will give them to you." Now, in order for a temptation to be a real temptation, the tempter has to be able to deliver the goods, right?
Right.
If I ask you to do something, and if you do it, I'll give you $1 million. It is not much of a temptation for you, because you know I don't have $1 million to give you, right? So it's got to be a temptation.
Right.
We forget, and we also forget that in ancient Judaism there was a strand of thought that said the Satan, Hasatan in Hebrew, the Satan was behind the nations pulling their strings. That doesn't mean that the nations couldn't do some good. That doesn't mean they couldn't be just at times. And in fact, the Bible seems to have an expectation the nations will act justly. Right. But let's understand ultimately who is doing the bidding.
Right.
And we have just ignored that.
Right.
That there is something about the earthly nations. There's a dark underbelly here in operation. And this is revealed in the temptation story. I do not know how we then can embrace a Christian nationalism that somehow said that, but basically is baptizes the unbaptizable.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, and to piggyback on that, so Satan offers Jesus the nations of the world. So why does Jesus reject that? Because he understands that this is not the effective plan that brings about the world that God intends to create.
Exactly right.
And there is only one way that world gets created, and that's through the cross.
Right.
And that's the reason Jesus rejects it, because Jesus knows that it is only through unmerited grace extended to people who are sinners, by expressing love, that then draws people to love others, to love themselves. That is where the transformation of the world takes place, not by having control of the political levers of power. And so that's what Jesus understands, and that's what the whole Christian message is. And that's what's wrong with the whole Christian nationalism approach to trying to preserve Christianity, is that it does nothing to preserve Christianity. It torpedoes it.
Yes.
Because it takes away the one thing, the influential thing that Christianity has, which is the ability to transform through sacrificial love and through unmerited grace extended to others, that then transforms them into people who do the same to other people. Yeah.
And it's the very kingdoms of the world that Jesus rejects having power over, that he has come to redeem.
Right.
And so, for me, because I've thought about this a lot, and it is, Jesus gets offered. I mean, seriously, Michael, what's a little devil worship in exchange for the kingdoms of the world? Think how much good you could do. Yeah. It's like, if I win the lottery, so what? What? Think of how much good I can do with it.
Yeah.
And it's a utilitarian view, right? The ends justifies the means. But Christian nationalists, frankly, would have taken the devil up on the offer, to be honest.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, Jesus rejects it, and they would have taken it. They would have taken the offer. And this is the problem, because it attempts to define God's kingdom and faithfulness to that kingdom through a means that Jesus himself rejected.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and a parallel passage, the temptation passage is the one that I keep coming back to over and over again. Another one I just came across recently that I was thinking about was where people are making excuses for why they can't come follow Jesus. And he uses the expression, unless you hate your father and mother and come and follow me, then, you're not worth. So the issue there that he's saying is that all other earthly attachments, even your family, and I think most people would say that their family is a bigger attachment than their nation. Yeah. That if you are not willing to put me above all other considerations, then you've missed the point. And I think that is, again, another way that it's just reiterating the same point, that first and foremost, you heard this thing about what's the one that these folks are using, stand for the flag, kneel for the cross. Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day. No, the issue is pick up the cross, pick up the cross, avoid idolatry. Yeah, exactly right.
I need to do something with my series on deconstructing me.
Yeah.
I'll give you credit for it. I'll give you a mention. I like that, because that's also bothered me. I understand when veterans who have served faithfully, who have served their country, they get bothered when some people kneel. And, I always say, I have one friend who doesn't watch football anymore because of Colin Kaepernick and all of that. Right. Which I say to him, look, it's a free country. You're free not to watch football anymore. I mean, listen, you're free to be offended, and you're free to watch football or not watch football. But the reality is Colin Kaepernick really is free to kneel for the anthem, right? Yeah. I mean, he's free to do that, whether you like. This is what, and I always like, one thing I've asked veterans when they say, well, let him kneel on his own time. And I always say, well, what does that mean? Right. When would be his own time? Like, you want him to put a flag out in his front yard and kneel while people drive by? I mean, the whole point of protest is you do it when people notice it. Exactly. Yes. Right. So anyway, so I understand the vets who get concerned about that. I respect that. Right.
If I could add that to that too, when the events were happening and they were kneeling, for the national anthem, I confess to you that I don't think it was the best approach for trying to make the case. And the reason is that I look back to people like Martin Luther King Jr. He tended to use at least the symbols of America and say they were good. They just haven't been extended far enough. You had all this thing about freedom, and it's great for white America, but when it came back for Black Americans, there was insufficient funds.
Yeah.
in order to fulfill the right statement.
Yeah.
So the idea is that how do we extend the positiveness of America for all, and the kneeling for the flag, right or wrong, I knew would be taken by many as a rejection of America. And I
Right.
don't think that that's the best way to try to build a way forward for the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
So, but I also understand this. In what way could a black person protest that a white person isn't going to get upset about it?
Yeah.
And I think that that's the frustration. If you're African American,
Yeah.
it doesn't make any difference what I do to stand up and say something's wrong here. You're going to find some reason
Yes.
to nitpick as to why the thing I did was somehow
Yes,
inappropriate.
that's right. That's right.
And so that's the other side of the
Yeah,
equation.
that's exactly right. Well, people have asked me when we get on this subject, well, when you're at a ball game and the national anthem is played, do you stand? Sure, I stand. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. It's a sign of respect. I'm glad to do that. I just don't
Right.
want to begrudge other people's the other thing,
Right.
because I believe that in freedom of speech and expression. And by the way, if I may say, freedom is a messy thing.
Yes, right.
Because
yeah.
it means I am not only free to express myself, but I have to allow you the freedom to express yourself, even when what you say I don't like. Right.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so we need to think about that. But I don't want to get too far afield here. We're back on the New
Right.
Testament on this. The other thing that strikes me about the temptation story was showing the kingdoms of the world and other things is that the problem with Christian nationalism is that it fails to recognize that the church is a transnational community.
Yes, exactly.
And that we transcend. I mean, there's a Diogenetus. I never can pronounce his name. There's a letter by Diogenetus who talks about the Christians, and he says that they live in every country, but they follow the customs of that country. But every homeland they live, but in all their homelands they live as foreigners.
Right.
And so,
exactly.
and so the idea is, you and I are Americans. We follow the customs of America. We both believe in being law-abiding as long as that law doesn't conflict with my faith. We believe in all of that. But there's something about you and I that just doesn't, being an American does not exhaustively define us. There's something more.
Correct.
And there is something that puts me and you in commonality with Christians in other countries that I don't have with non-Christians in this country.
Yes, right.
Right? That there is something that transcends all of this. And and by the way, the other thing is, I know many Christian nationalists who are all for bringing Jesus to the world. And of course, that's what they think when they think of Christianity being global.
Right.
But this isn't just some disembodied gospel proclamation.
Right.
There's something about this that we are transnational, and that Christian nationalism just completely undercuts the globalism of the church.
Right. Yes, exactly. Wraps up your identity in the nation as opposed to the kingdom of God. Right. Yeah.
Which is why I dislike America first. I don't think obviously don't think our politicians should ignore America. I mean, we vote up for them, hoping that they'll act in the best interest for the common good. But America first sounds to me like America only. For some people, it's America only. Right. For others, it's America favored in a way that I just don't think the church can embrace, because it matters to me. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, 2002, whenever that was, the church in Iraq, a couple, 1.2 or 3 million or something like that Christians. And the Iraq war devastated the church community there. I mean, it's a shell of its former self. Did any Christians in America say, if we do this, what's going to happen to our sisters and brothers? Right. Nobody thought that. And by the way, I'm going to be the first to tell you, I didn't think that either. Yeah. So I'm not pointing fingers here, but we should have we as believers, Christians who are transnational, the first thing we should have said is, if our country does this, what is the fallout for our sisters and brothers in the faith over there? Right.
It has consequences. I think there's just also the challenge that, and this is one of the things I go to in my mind. It's so I can hear somebody listening to this conversation and saying, "Oh, so you're saying that America should just abandon all of its interests and just do whatever's right for everybody else, and we'll, just let's just throw our borders wide open and let everybody come in, and we'll not have any, rules or laws or anything because we don't want to exclude anybody." And I think that's obviously the extreme, criticism that's being given, but it does raise a tricky point that I think Christian ethics has to reflect on, and that is that I think as individuals we are embedded in families,
Yeah.
and then families are embedded in communities, and communities are embedded in larger communities, and there is a sense in which you do have a prior responsibility to those closest to you to take care of each other. I mean, what's the passage where Jesus is criticizing some of the religious leaders where they said they've declared all their wealth korban so that they don't have to take care of their parents and their whoever's there. There's this idea that you do have a commitment to those who are fellow members of the community that you're in.
Yeah.
But that has to be an enlightened commitment to those that is informed by this transnational Christian perspective of being in community with others around the world, that you have that connection. And so, and that's not an easy formula that you just lay out as to what that is. I think it requires some reflection and some balance. So I do not like the idea of America first. I do think that it's appropriate that nations look to their people that they are representing and how can they take care of them well, while also being productive members of a global community. So I think that's, and where the balance is reasonable people can disagree about that.
Well, as they say, the devil is in the details. And look, I agree with that completely. What I'm doing is trying to say we need to see the complexity of these situations. They're not simple. So I understand the tensions that we're in. Right. But I want us to be able to ask that question. I want us to be able to ask at that point, okay, in the midst of this mix that we're talking about with Iraq, what's going to be the fallout for our brothers and sisters over there? We need to think about this. So I mean, I get what I'm trying to do is call for a deeper, more complex conversation. And by the way, I do have to tell you, when someone says to me, for example, I do believe in generous immigration. I think immigration makes us better. But whenever I get into this conversation, I always count on a couple of people saying, "Oh, well, you want open borders." To which I say, when you want to be a serious thinker, come back and talk to me. Right. Because I'm not going to respond to this extreme nonsense of, I want open borders, or I want this, I want that. And, to be if you can be a serious thinker and nuanced, let's have the conversation. But I'm not going to entertain that kind of nonsense. I don't have enough years left to do that.
Yeah. What's the point in trying to have a conversation with somebody who isn't interested in a conversation? I mean, well,
that's exactly right. And it becomes, by the way, it just becomes a way to end the conversation and dismiss people you disagree with, right? That's that and labeling and other things. I just think that the vision of Jesus just precludes this kind of seeing America as somehow unique. By the way, I've said before that if you want to talk about a Christian nation, the only Christian nation that's ever existed is called the church. Yeah, right. It doesn't have geographical borders. It's made up of local congregations, many of whom aren't really connected or talking to each other. Right. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, if you want a Christian nation, if you want to find an organization, a place that puts Jesus in, really does try to put Jesus in the center and live within Jesus's vision, it's the church. Yeah. And so the church is really, I've always tongue in cheek said that every time I have to fill out a form for something and it says nationality, I'm having to put down church to see what the response is. But that is my first loyalty because, by the way, it is in the church on earth where the kingdom is expressed. Right. On earth.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier conversations we had, but I think it was Scott McKnight who talks about the idea of viewing the kingdom of God as having embassies and ambassadors in every nation of the world. Mm-hmm. Each church effectively is an embassy, and its members are ambassadors. And they are there to represent that kingdom to that location. So they are there, they're a part of the community, they're looking for the good of the community they are in, but that's not where their citizenship is.
That's right.
And so I think that perspective helps me often think about what is my role in a given culture. I'm to participate in that culture, I'm to seek for its good, but that's not where the ultimate loyalties are to lie.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It's a great image. I like that a lot. And by the way, Paul uses the ambassador language, doesn't he?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Michael, what else? Anything else we want to say here for the good of the order?
Well, I enjoyed the conversation. I think this is a challenging one because there are people who are on continuums, and like, as you said, it's easy to exaggerate and to cast anybody who says anything that you disagree with in the most negative light. Yeah. Because I value being an American. I do think America has been special in world history. I think the initial idea that every white man should be able to have the right to vote was very novel at the time that it did. And there are things in our Constitution and our culture that then created the opportunity for a peaceful expansion and inclusion of that type of participation in America. And so when I stand up and I sing the national anthem, I am positive about America, not because of what it is now and what it has been in the past, but because of its aspiration of what it says it wants to be in the future. And I'm on board for that aspiration. Yeah. And unfortunately, this idea of a America first that is using America to impose a particular version of Christianity on America is counter to what I understand that aspiration of America to be. Yeah. And so that's how I would kind of sum up my look on this. I love America. I'm patriotic about America. My ancestors, my great-grandmother Cruz ancestors go back to Mayflower. I'm descended from 8 different Mayflower people. I've got people in the Revolution, Civil War. Very proud of that history that is there. But my ultimate loyalty, my ultimate citizenship is not here with America. Yeah. Yeah, and I wholeheartedly concur with that. And I do think actually this kind of nationalism that wants to make central, again, I'm going to use Tucker Carlson's, because I think Carlson, frankly, is the most dangerous snake oil salesman in America right now. Absolutely. Who talks about legacy voters. And I think they call this conservative. It's not conservative, it's regressive. It's not. This is regressive. Yes, it is. Because there are true conservatives that are just disdain this, and rightly so. Yeah. And that's why I continue to say that what is going on right now in this authoritarian populism is not conservative. It is not conservative. My great-grandparents came over from Italy and Sicily at the turn of the 20th century. And my great-grandfather, I still remember him telling me a story. He was in his 90s at the time. And that they were coming on the boat, coming over to America, and off in the distance, they got to the New York coast. They could see the Statue of Liberty, and the whole boat just erupted in Italian, "Liberté, liberté." Yeah, and that's a moving story. It moves me, and so I embrace that, and so I do. I agree. I think we should commend America when it does when it does well. By the way. We rebuilt Europe after the Second World War, right? We did the Marshall Plan, right? Yeah. I think that's one of the greatest things our country did was rebuild Europe after the Second World War when we could have told them they were on their own. Right? Exactly. Right. But we understood that for a stable world order, we had to rebuild it. Right. And so, there are great things that we've done, but I'm not going to hesitate to criticize and be serious when I do that, and I do that as a Christian. And part of holding fellow Christians accountable is don't twist this wonderful faith that we have into something for your own selfish, self-centered ends. Right. Don't do it. Yeah. So, all right, absolutely. Michael. Good conversation as always. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you. And you've been posting on social media about barbecue. So you just lately.
We had one barbecue place in Ashland here that was
Yeah.
really good, and
Right.
COVID just did them in,
Right.
and they had to close down. And boy, I'll tell you what, I haven't had a good barbecue since then. So,
Well, I have to tell you that just about 6 blocks from my house, there's a building used to be Old International House of Pancakes, and
yeah,
was a couple of things after that. It's been closed
Yeah.
for a while, and
Yeah.
I now see a big banner outside. I
yeah,
don't know the exact name of it, but it's a barbecue place that's getting ready to open right there. I could be in walking distance of barbecue.
wow.
That'd be great. We'll see that.
Kansas City, our motto is more barbecue restaurants than gas stations, and some of our gas stations have barbecue restaurants.
That's right. There you go. That works.
All right, good. Michael, as always, good. Friends, thank you for joining us. This is Faith Seeking Understanding, the episode of Calmly Considered. And the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding University is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not seek to understand that I may believe, but I believe in order to understand. My friends, keep seeking. Have a great day.